if I start now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, welcome to everyone for this, our second live cast of this new series of Wellbeing Livecasts. And this one's on the topic of COVID, anxiety and uncertainty. I'm Richard Duggins and I'm chairing today. I'm a consultant psychiatrist in the Centre for Specialist Psychological Therapists. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Michelle Evans and Mark Freeston, who are going to have a conversation. Michelle's an administrator in our trust, and Mark is Professor of Clinical Psychology at Newcastle University. And just to say a little bit about Mark now. So Mark's been developing models and treatments of OCD and generalized anxiety disorder for nearly 30 years. He's author of many books, including some widely used self-help books. And one of his current research projects is understanding the role of uncertainty in anxiety and in relation to the pandemic. I've also been told while we've been waiting to come on air that he likes good wine and that he supported Newcastle United through thick and thin. So I think you'll agree. We're very lucky to have Mark join us, and he's a great person to be able to have a conversation with for a Wellbeing Livecast. So Michelle's going to talk and have a chat with Mark for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then there's going to be time for questions and comments from all of you joining us today. We are videoing this and it will go up on the YouTube channel of the Trust, so please bear that in mind. So without further ado, Michelle, I'll hand over to you and Mark.
Thanks, Richard. Hi, Mark.
Hiya.
So, our first question, how did you start looking at uncertainty?
Okay, so this is sort of the scary bit, which is it's almost 30 years ago. And so we were working on worry at the time. So this was when I was in Quebec. And we were trying to figure out what was it about people who worried a lot. So people who have generalized anxiety disorder, for example. And so one of the things that we'd noticed, and it was a clinical hunch to start with, was that they didn't seem to like uncertainty. That's sort of situations where they didn't know what was going to happen. This was a bit different from some of the other anxiety disorders because in social anxiety, there's some quite specific ideas about what could go wrong. The same in panic disorder. So people have got a clear idea of what it is that they're afraid of. But in worry, it seemed a lot sort of vaguer. It's just that they didn't know what was going to happen. And so that's how we started looking at it originally.
So there is a specific disorder as well, but we all have an intolerance to uncertainty to different levels, don't we? All of us.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Michelle. And I guess the way that I would think about it now, we started looking for something specific and found something universal. So, but with people who worry a lot, people who have generalized anxiety disorder, it's sort of they're the super specialists of intolerance of uncertainty. And so it's both specific to generalized anxiety disorder. It's common to many other mental health difficulties, psychological problems, but it's also a universal experience. So, and in the last couple of years, really, we started doing this before the pandemic. We'd already started looking at uncertainty more generally in many different situations.
And who's we? Who've been looking at this?
Myself and almost a cast of thousands. Lots and lots of students. I see one or two, some students are online, ex-students. So we've had lots of different people. Undergraduate students, MSc students, Declan Sci students, colleagues, clinicians, people like Kevin Mears. Kevin and I have worked together for a long time. and researchers from around the world. And at the moment, we've got an international consortium, and we're doing research in Greek, Italian, Spanish, and English.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of local clinicians who are involved in different, couple of whom I can see are attending today. So please join in if you have things to add. So, but to do this type of research over so long, it takes a lot of different people.
So it sounds that this isn't fixed for people either. Well, from my personal experience, it isn't. I've had more anxiety about uncertainty during this whole pandemic thing than I think I ever really.
Yeah, so I guess one way of thinking about that is that we collectively, all of us, have been exposed to more obvious uncertainty in the last year than probably at any other point in our life, certainly as a universal experience. And uncertainty is, so we may have had an illusion of certainty before that in our lives. You know, so the idea that you could travel when you wanted, you could go to anywhere, you know, provided that the weather wasn't too bad, you could fly to anywhere in the world. But then all of a sudden we've found all sorts of restrictions on our lives, and things that we've taken for granted, we found out have not been as predictable as we expected, and especially because the virus is new. You know, we've only known what it is for less than a year and a half. It's amazing how rapidly the vaccines have been developed, but these were new vaccines for a new illness so the vaccines are good news, but there's all sorts of uncertainties about them. Will they work for new variants? How long will the protection last? And these are all the things we can't possibly know because they're all new. And so there's just been much more uncertainty in people's lives in the last year.
I think that one of the difficulties with this the pandemic is also that the people we would normally look to make things certain, like the government or, you know, a high up people in the trust, or they don't know either, do they? So there's nowhere for it to go. There's no answer.
No, all the information we've got on the pandemic is what has happened so far. So so we know what's happened so far. We can make some shortish term predictions about what will happen next, but that's based on what's happened recently. But the further we go out into the future, the less we know. So, and this is really, it's about not knowing what is going to happen. Our predictions are only as good as the data we've got, and the predictions are based on what's happened already. They're not based on what's going to happen in the future. And this is just everyone being confronted with it and trying to do the best possible. And I think one of the things we've really been seeing is that as soon as we've got one bit of certainty, then we suddenly have a whole new bunch of questions. So before it was, will we have vaccines? Now, as soon as we've got vaccines, is when will everyone get them? If they get them, how long will it last for? Will there be rare side effects? Will they work with variants? So every time we get one point in the sand, the point of uncertainty spreads forward from that. Yeah. So it's always catch up.
The goalposts are just constantly moving. We thought we were all going to have some, you know, the lockdown was going to end at Christmas, and then that changed as well. And it's, every single little bit of light that we get given seems to just be taken away just at the last minute, doesn't it? The moment.
Yeah. And that makes it really difficult as well, because it's important to look forward to the future and have things to look forward to. But it's when people start looking forward to sort of very specific things that can only happen if certain things are in place or there are certain changes. And that's when people get very angry and frustrated and disappointed and let down. So it's how can we sort of look forward to a future, but with some flexibility, and how can we look forward to things that are important to us, but perhaps without wanting them to happen in very specific ways that we'd imagined them, because that's the bit that gets affected so much.
Yeah, like my son was going to get married, and that had to be cancelled. And obviously, the whole family was very upset by that. But
yeah, and I guess that's really understandable, but it's trying to sort of separate things out. So not getting married in the way that's expected, but it doesn't mean to say that the relationship is on hold or. It's most difficult when people get attached to very specific ways of doing things.
Yeah. So if we can't do that, then what can we do? How do we have something to look forward to? How do we have a future to look to? What can we do?
Well, part of it is making sure that we're looking after ourselves in the present, and I think that's something that we can talk a bit more about. But it's also thinking about how to flexibly. So how do we extract the important bit out of that event in a way that is more flexible? So, things are often about celebration. It's about being able to spend time, but also thinking about, and it's always nice if we can get everyone together, but we might not be able to get everyone together, but we may be able to get different subgroups of people together. So celebration that is spread out rather than celebration that is concentrated. So trying to find, and this is the challenging bit, which is what are the parts that can work with flexibility rather depending on this one very specific thing. But trying to keep this looking towards the future with optimism and is really tricky, because we do get very caught up in specific ways of doing things rather than what is the essence of the thing that we're trying to achieve.
I just turned 50, and I had planned last year that for this birthday I was going to go to my idea of paradise, wherever that is, and obviously couldn't do that. So the restrictions had lifted, so you can have garden visits. So I went round to see all of my family. I had lots and lots of little parties instead with people I hadn't seen for like a year. So that I took your advice without knowing at that time, but it was lovely, and I wouldn't change it now.
Yeah, no, and for myself, I became a grandfather for the first time last October. And my granddaughter is already almost 6 months, and she's probably going to be 9-10 months before I see her for the first time. But there's I still feel I know her. I've seen a change on a daily, weekly basis. And fortunately, technology can help us with that. But I'm looking forward to that as well. And we've got a plan. It may work, it may not. If not, we'll find other ways of doing what we were intending to do.
So if you could summarize practical things that people can take away from this and put into place and do if they feel that they're struggling at the minute because they've hinged everything on some kind of holiday that probably, there's a possibility it might disappear in front of your eyes very soon with all the travel restrictions and what have you, or something like that. What kind of practical things do you think you would suggest to them?
I think one of the things that we've really learned quite early on in lockdown is when we've got this sort of massive disruption in our lives, it's really important to have to build a sense of safety. And this can be through very simple things. And these are often building in little routines. The thing I was most concerned about at the start of lockdown, when we didn't know if the supermarkets would work, was that coffee would disappear. And I'm not a coffee addict, but I do like my first coffee in the day. And that sort of level of routine. Soon as I could, exercise, getting out and walking in my regular patch. And what was interesting, when I got out and started walking, I had multiple routes through the area where I could go, but I found myself going on the same route every day. And that seemed to be very important. And so seeing the same things, but seeing the season changing as well, and sort of noticing what was different each time, what I'd seen. So this sort of looking for things that have value, that give a sense of not just well-being, but sort of connect with things that are important. And it doesn't matter what it is. So, and I think a lot more people went back to doing things they'd done in the past and started doing new things last year. So, if knitting's your thing, knit. If it's singing, sing. Find ways to sing. If it's dancing around the kitchen, dance. If it's walking or gardening. But it's really making sure that people are getting enough of these activities. And one of the things that's really important is that these are things that engage you, so that you're not just thinking about all the things that you can't do, but sort of it's difficult to worry when you're engaged in something that you enjoy doing and has meaning for you. So, and so if we think about mindfulness and things like that, it doesn't mean to say we all need to practice mindfulness, but it is mindful attention to the things that we're doing that we enjoy, that give meaning to our lives, that are not dependent on a certain stage of coming out of lockdown. And I think getting those routines in place if you're feeling very unsettled, but once you start feeling a bit more settled, then it's possible to play around the edges of the routines, to break them up a bit, to do things a little differently. But if you're feeling unsettled again because something has happened, you can go back to the routines. So when things are disrupted, we need to have this sort of sense of safety that we can build for ourselves. So even if the world around us is all disrupted, there's some things that we can count on in our everyday existence.
I've definitely found walking has been a huge help to me, and noticing nature when I'm walking, and music. Definitely the dancing in the kitchen. I've had full 2-hour raves by myself in there. And colouring in as well, which is something I hadn't done since I was a child, and I've done lots of colouring in, and it's definitely helped. And I think, like you're saying, it is because those things are mindful in themselves. When you're doing that, you have to concentrate on what you're doing, but they're relaxing. There's no stress involved, and it does take away the anxiety, sitting doing things like that.
And I think a lot of people have gone back to things that they've done previously, okay, and maybe stopped doing things from childhood, things from earlier points in their lives. And when we've done a lot of workshops, we've asked what people, people who've started cooking again, what have they cooked? And often they've said, something I used to cook with my grandma, or so going back to points in time where specific memories. So a lot of these routines and activities, it's not just about distraction. It's not just about being busy. It's also about connection. And if we think about it, linking with the past sort of helps us build that, rather than every day is Thursday, which is what it seems to be like in lockdown. It's never quite the weekend.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah, so So these sort of connections that sort of go from the past and trying to build things to the future that we can look forward to and we can make sure that they happen. This sort of helps maintain the sense of time perspective, which is really important. The science shows us that having a perspective of time, so from the past to the present to the future, is associated with almost everything good in life in terms of mental well-being. And that's what's been really tricky. So things that connect you to the past, things that you can look forward to in a flexible way rather than in a rigid way, I think, and then being present in the moment as well.
Has there been anything personally for you like that other than the coffee that's helped you through?
Yeah, well, I know Richard was probably going to ask me about this one, so I'll talk about one of the things personally that I found myself doing was eating Marmite. Okay, and so I'd normally have Marmite about once every few months. I also had a jar of Vegemite in the cupboard as well, because I was born in the UK, moved to New Zealand when I was a teenager and got to eat my Vegemite there. I like both. But what was really interesting, I suddenly figured out that's 3 days in a row I've eaten Marmite. And why am I eating Marmite and not Vegemite? And what it came down to is it would have been my earliest memories were of Marmite. Marmite was more deeply ingrained in my memory than Vegemite. So it was really interesting noticing myself doing things like that and this idea of connection. So that's one of the things that I noticed myself doing. And like I said, when I started walking, I found myself going around the same route every time as well. So I can see some comments on the Vegemite Marmite controversy here.
I've just seen one as well. There's something as well that I've seen in podcasts when I was sort of doing a little bit of research about you for this, and it was about there was the routine part of things from a practical point of view, but there was about information as well, and how that is overwhelming and what we can do about it, how that creates anxiety and uncertainty.
Yes, and I think we're all aware of sort of very unhelpful information, but the problem is that all of the social media news feeds are all set up that whatever we've looked at, we will be offered more of. So the algorithms are there. It's not a big nasty conspiracy. That's just how it works. Okay. So we get stuff for free, but the price that we pay is that people will feed us more of things that we look at. So it's sort of being aware of how media works. But even if you think about what a journalist's job is to ask about things we don't know. Okay, so if you think of your typical press conference, we will announce what we know and what we're going to do tomorrow, and then somebody comes up and asks the questions, well, what are we going to do if? So even reputable media, or it might be, why didn't we know? Whose fault was it that we didn't know? So a journalist's job, even the good journalists, is to ask about things we don't know. So even reputable news coverage comes at a cost. So we'll be able to find out what we know at the moment, but we'll also get a lot more of all the things that we don't know. So I think finding out different ways to, I listen to far less news than I used to. I dip into it if I really need to find something out, I'll go to, what are the current restrictions? I'll go to the website. If I need to know if I can recycle go to the recycling center, I'll look it up on the website. So I've changed the way I've started, instead of listening to so much news on the radio, I listen to more music on the radio. I'm very careful which feeds I follow. I like wildlife, so I make sure the feeds that I get are wildlife, not pandemic. So it's that idea of increasing the things that are life enhancing and reducing to things that increase uncertainty. And when I do want to find something out, I'll go and look for it, and I'm very careful where I look for it. And making sure that I resist the temptation to click on clickbait or headlines or things, because as soon as I click on one of those, I'm going to get something more that is similar to what I've just clicked on.
Yes, I end up down a rabbit hole. I mean, I've had a recent kind of experience with that myself. Just listened to some things about India, and it actually choked me up. I was going to cry, and there's not really anything I can do about it. And then all the questions about, when it comes over here, the things you've been saying about whether our vaccines are going to work, and just get flooded with it all. And you're right, the best thing is not to look at it. That is easier said than done, though, because there's a bit of a fear of not knowing those things. So I think, again, that takes you full circle back to the things that you were saying to get value from and try to build them into a routine.
Well, one of the things I started doing early in the pandemic was I started going on to local news. So I think there might be some people here from Cumbria, the Cumbria Crack, the Northern Echo, different things. And when you go into the local news, what you find out is things like the local criminals are still being local criminals, not necessarily good news, but nothing's changed. Animals are being rescued, children are winning prizes, charities are still doing amazing things, someone else has just turned 100. So actually engaging with that sort of local news and things like that gives a whole different perspective on the world as well. So I think it's being really selective about what you attend to, what you seek out.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, especially after how I've been feeling after what I just watched before. Oh, hi Richard.
I'm appearing, Michelle. I don't want to cut across if you've got another question ready, but I was just kind of appearing because we've got a few questions appearing in chat and other people will be waiting. So what do you think?
I think go with the questions.
Okay.
Because there was some sent as well, wasn't there? So
yeah, there's some sent as well. So that sounds like a good idea. And also, I think it's a nice time to come in when we're talking about animals being rescued and children winning prizes. It's coming in a positive thing. Okay. So I'm gonna thank you for that conversation. It was fascinating. Really wonderful. And also, we've got over 60 people joining us on this webcast. So talking about community, I think there's a kind of community here, and more people will join to watch this on YouTube too. So I think that's great. So I'm going to go through some questions. There was one that came early on, which I really liked, which was from Joe, who works in one of our wellbeing services here in the trust. Is there a reason, Joe asked, people don't habituate, meaning I suppose don't get used to uncertainty, as we do tend to other anxiety situations? So I suppose I think about it, it doesn't seem to matter how much change we go through, change still seems to be difficult. What do you think?
That's a really good question, and I guess this is something that we thought a lot about over the last few years. One of the things that some of the brain imaging studies actually show is that the bits that deal with threat and the bits with uncertainty are in different parts of the brain. Okay, so uncertainty and danger are two different systems. And so one of the things that we're finding out about uncertainty, and there's sort of the there's the biological evolutionary theory that says being born to be intolerant of uncertainty is a useful thing to be. However, many people learn to become less tolerant of uncertainty over time, but others don't. And part of it is because we do know we can make people more tolerant of uncertainty, because that's the sort of things we've been doing with people with anxiety disorders over the last few years. I know Ash Tiplady's here, and I think Layla might be here as well, and others who've worked on developing these treatments, and Sally over from Cumbria as well. And partly is because people do engage in behaviors that sort of backfire and make. So if we think about the information, if you're intolerant of uncertainty, it seems like the idea is to get more information. But as we've been talking, getting more information makes you more uncertain. You find out about all the things you don't know. So there's lots of behaviors that sort of operate in that way. And it's actually helping people to think about how to embrace uncertainty in the everyday, rather than to try and achieve certainty. So I think the way that we can get people more tolerant of uncertainty, and that's where a lot of our treatment work is focused.
Okay, thank you. And that might fit with a comment from Phil. Phil that's just come in. Phil says everything is uncertain. Is the issue not then a problem with the never-ending task of trying to make things certain? I don't. Does that fit with what you're saying, Mark?
Yes. So I think we've had illusions of certainty, which have been completely demolished in the last year or so. So I don't think the world ever was quite as certain as we thought it was, but we've just been collectively and massively confronted all at the same time. So I think people's experiences of uncertainty were individual at different times for different things. And so, or that they were experiencing uncertainty in one period of one part of their lives, but not in another. Okay. And so, but what the pandemic has done, it's just sort of disrupted everything for everyone all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of the step change. But uncertainty has always been there, and but often for people, there are some parts of their lives which continue with degrees of certainty, while other things are uncertain. But also people who go through very stressful, traumatic events, things that shake up their lives completely, will eventually go back to re-establishing a new, if you like, more predictable, more certain. So I think it's just how obvious it's been in the last year, which is the major change.
Okay, that's really helpful. I wanted to pick up another question I thought was interesting, which was from Cal Peter, which is she's the lead of one of our staff wellbeing services. You might know Cal Peter, and she's asking what systemic cultural changes can an organisation like ours mean, so an NHS organisation, support and introduce to help their staff cope with uncertainty better? Is there anything we can do?
I think there's at several different levels. One, I think, is things like a sense of community. And one of the things that's happened with people working remotely is those 5-minute conversations in the coffee room haven't been taking place. And if you think what it feels like working at home versus work, or the impact of social distancing on those 5-minute conversations in the coffee room, or fewer people in the building, people not in there on the same days. So So there's been a lot that's happened to sort of break down of that. This is what work feels like. Okay. And so things that could possibly be done to help rebuild that or find alternative ways. And I know some organizations, some parts of the organization work very hard at doing that. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is back to communication of information and how, from a corporate level, from a manager, at all levels. So I think there's things that can be done, really thinking about how information is communicated. And we had some things in the university where it would all go out on a Friday afternoon. That's you don't send information out on a Friday afternoon. It could have waited till Monday morning or Tuesday. Yeah, and so I think organizations have learned, but really thinking how information is communicated, when it's communicated, and also any new information will create uncertainty. So to make sure there's some way of following that up. If you've got questions about this, put a name and a contact to it, so that if someone is really concerned about it, because the worst thing, if you start asking colleagues, you ask 4 colleagues about something, you've got 5 different opinions. And everyone trying to figure out what's going on. So some things that organizations can do is to make sure that the person who may not have all the answers, but has some of, at least knows what the communication is trying to say, is there as a named person. So I think there's both sort of at a community level, and there's also things at a corporate level are 2 of the obvious things that I see. But I know some of my colleagues have been thinking a lot more about this as well within the organisations.
That's very helpful. And there's been a few things come up on the chat. Paul Veach, who chaired our last livecast, has put up that reminded us that one of the things that some of the inpatient staff discussed there was how helpful it was for the routine of coming into the hospital ward every day and having the benefit to be part of a community. And somebody saying, it's really helpful for some colleagues to be chatting on Teams at the end of the day to help people feel connected. I wanted to pick up, if he's here, and he might not want to do it, but Paddy Middleton asked a really interesting question. But I don't know, Paddy, do you fancy asking it live? I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's...
You've already done it, Richard.
I have, haven't I? Paddy, do you want to ask that question? Looks not.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. Yeah, I've been working for a number of years in a post-IAPT drop-in centre around the Ashington area. It was set up to support service users that had been through the PWP programme and to ease them back into the community as well, give them some sort of patterns and a safe place to meet and socialise. Since the first lockdown last March, that was closed, unfortunately. We moved it, believe it or not, to a local pub where you could sit outside, which was quite nice for a while, but then the pubs were closed as well. The feedback that I'm getting from the members that I've been keeping in contact with is that they've been relapsing. They're feeling much more isolated, less valued. General anxieties are setting in, depression, feelings of suicide with some of them as well. And I'm just wondering how you would suggest you sort of re-engage with people like that who just feel pretty marginalized and shut behind their doors really again,
Yeah, I think this is a really tricky one, and we often talk about social support in a very sort of general sense, But I think when we think about social support, what we need to do is to unpack the different elements that might be in there. So presumably the meetings were known to take place at a specific time or at a particular moment, and so that there would have been something about the structure in the day. There would have been the other things about regular faces, seeing the same people, and so once again, it's going to be what are the creative ways that can be used to engage. One of the things that is possible to do is to meet up and walk around, so I guess it's how can you bottle some of those elements of something that makes perfect sense and was working really well, but rather than getting it sort of this being done in a particular locality, in a particular place, can we get some of that operating perhaps in a more mobile way for some people, is one thing that I think comes to mind. But it's the it's that building of some sort of rhythm into people's lives and supporting them to do that, but in flexible ways. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question there, Paddy.
Yeah, I mean, what we found, Mark, when we were setting this up initially was it was pretty hard getting a lot of people through that door in the first place, because there was a lot of, social anxiety, people battling with agoraphobia. It was a really big deal just getting them through that door and then building up those patterns, those structures, as you said, having a certain place, a certain day on a week where you have familiar faces as well. So it's embedding that familiarity as well helps build that confidence and that bonding. That was stripped away basically overnight. So now these people are essentially fragmented again, trying to re-engage and build up those patterns for going for walks and things like that you suggested. I don't think that's workable right now.
Yeah, it's almost sort of one person at a time, isn't it? It's to, and I guess, is there a role for volunteers? Is there a role for some sort of befriending to, if you like, increased resource that's available?
I'm gonna come in there, Paddy. Just because of the time, it's a fantastic question, and I on one, it's clearly so important and a challenge, and also I think one that many of our community teams will be dealing with, and voluntary sector organisations. So it's such an important question to ask, and it is going to be such a challenge, but one that you're clearly thinking about, Paddy, in such an important way. So thank you. But I hope some of this is helpful. But I'm going to.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
I'm going to bring this to an end because we're amazingly near 1 o'clock. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to cover everyone's questions. There's some really good ones there, and I haven't been able to cover them, but we have covered some. So I want to thank Mark and Michelle for their conversation and their involvement. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our audience for questions and comments and the active chat. And there's some very helpful stuff in the chat if people have a look. This will be available on the Trust YouTube channel next week. So if you've got any colleagues you feel would like to see it, do let them know. Our previous livecast, which we mentioned, which was on inpatient staff, which was about what it's been like working on a mental health ward during the pandemic and how people have kept going, is going to go on the YouTube Trust YouTube today. So if you want to watch that, please do. It's a very helpful livecast. And then just to say, our next livecast is at the same time on Friday, the 14th of May, and we've got a specialist talking on the topic of can I sleep on it, sleeping well and carrying on in the pandemic. So I think once again that'll be a helpful livecast. So thank you very much. I hope you get to enjoy some of this sunshine today, and thanks so much for joining us. Goodbye.
Thanks very much. Bye.